Macro photography has always been something that I love, and I have a number of macro lenses that I use to capture the amazing tiny details of the world around us that we don't usually see. A normal macro lens can get this close, but with the same subject you can get even closer with the Venus Laowa 25mm f2.8 2.5 to 5 times ultra macro lens when set to 2.5 times magnification, and even closer when you set it to 5 times magnification. It goes beyond what you can do with most macro lenses. Typical macro lenses allow you to achieve a 1-to-1 magnification ratio. That means however big something is in real life, it will be the same size on your sensor. The Venus Laowa macro lens's 2.5 to 5 times magnification means that the subject will be 2.5 to 5 times bigger on your camera sensor than it is in real life. I'll be totally honest, I was more than a little skeptical about this lens. It doesn't look like your typical lens with its tiny front element, but I wanted to keep an open mind and see how it would perform out in the field. Normally, if I want to get magnification beyond what a macro lens can give me, that is beyond 1 times magnification, I would use a wide-angle lens that I have mounted backwards on my camera using a BR2A reversing ring. I often use an old 24mm or 28mm lens, which can give me 2 times, 3 times, or even more magnification depending on the amount of extension I put between the lens and the camera. I can use extension tubes or bellows to increase the distance between the lens and the camera and increase the magnification. The longer the distance between the lens and the camera, the greater the magnification. The Venus Laowa gives me a variable amount of magnification from 2.5 to 5 times. I achieve that by simply rotating the lens, which lengthens the lens. I'm not really zooming, I'm simply extending the distance of the front element to the camera sensor. Just like when I want to increase the magnification of my reverse lens by increasing the distance of the lens from the camera by adding more extension tubes or lengthening the bellows. I do really like that the Laowa is versatile and pretty easy to change the magnification. This makes it easier to not only find my subject but also capture images at a variety of magnifications much easier. One thing about macro photography is that it can be very difficult to find your subject at high magnification. The huge advantage that the Laowa lens has is that it has a small front element and it is way easier for me to find my subject. If I am using a regular lens or the Laowa lens, the subject needs to be in the middle of the lens. Because the front of the Laowa is smaller than a regular lens, it is easier for me to peek around and get the lens close and then look back at the variable flip-out screen and see my subject. The variable screen makes it much easier for me to try different angles and find my subject, so I always use it. You will need to be close to your subject. At 2.5 times magnification, the front element of your lens will be around 4.6 centimeters or 1.8 inches away from your subject, and at 5 times magnification, the front element will be 4.1 centimeters or 1.6 inches away from your subject. Something that makes it much easier for me to find my subject is to start at 2.5 times magnification and then zoom to 5 times magnification once I have found my subject. Once I can see my subject on the screen, I physically move the camera towards or away from my subject until I see it come into focus. It can be helpful to turn on focus peaking on your camera so it is easier to see what is in focus. There is a colored overlay that shows up on the part of the subject that is in focus. It also can be incredibly hard to keep your subject in the frame with extreme macro photography. Mounting my camera on a tripod is not something I usually do, especially if I have a subject that might move, because it can be really awkward to adjust the tripod. I rest my arm on part of the tripod and use it as a base so that I can more easily make micro adjustments to my position and keep stable. At high magnification, the depth of field is literally razor thin, so you will often need to stop down your aperture to get as much depth of field as possible. The smallest aperture of the Venus Laowa 25mm lens is f16. At f2.8, not much will be in focus, and even at f16 you won't have a ton of depth of field at high magnification. The majority of the time my lens is set to f16 because movements of millimeters can be the difference between an in-focus image and an out-of-focus image. The extra depth of field at f16 helps me to have a wider plane of focus. When it comes to camera settings, I make sure my camera is set to not show the effects of the settings on the screen. If I did show the settings on the screen would be black. I use manual exposure and set my camera to the fastest flash sync speed, which is usually 1/200th or 1/250th depending on your camera. My ISO can vary, but I often set it between 100 and 800. The higher ISO settings can put less of a strain on my flash, which I am using to illuminate the scene. At 800 ISO, the flash can recycle faster and I still get a great quality image. There are times when I push my ISO up to 2000 or even higher when I need to get a bit more balance in my exposure, but mostly I'm around 800 ISO. Speaking of flash, it is essential with macro photography beyond 1x magnification, especially when you are setting an aperture of f16. I have a number of different options for flash, and I have another video that goes through those options. Most of the time I use my custom-made flash modifier that attaches to a speedlight on the camera. The biggest problem with that modifier is that it is large and can be difficult to get into tight situations. It essentially has to go over top of your subject, but it does provide beautiful light. Sometimes when I'm photographing bugs, I have found that they actually don't mind having this giant white thing above them and they just go about what they have been doing. When it comes to flash settings for macro photography at high magnification, usually I set the flash to manual exposure. All the illumination for the image comes from the flash, and so the light will be the same for every shot. However, because the Venus Laowa can change its magnification setting by lengthening the distance from the front of the lens to the sensor, the amount of light needed has to increase. So it is easier for me to use auto TTL flash. It does mean that once in a while the flash might have a slightly underexposed image because the camera makes a mistake, but it's worth it to not have to adjust the flash every time I increase or decrease the magnification. I've been capturing macro photos for years with macro lenses, reverse wide-angle lenses, adding extension tubes and bellows, and so I wasn't sure about this different looking lens, but the Venus Laowa 2.5 to 5 times Ultra Macro lens delivers. It is easy to use, goes beyond what a typical macro lens can do, allows me to vary my magnification, and most importantly delivers beautifully sharp images. When I want to go beyond 1:1 magnification out in the field, it will be the lens that I reach for most often. If you have any questions, thoughts, or ideas, please write them in the comments below. If you like the content I'm creating, please consider subscribing. Thanks so much.